Okay, let's talk about the Boyd Cruise painting, The Levee at New Orleans. It's just titled The Levee at New Orleans. We've added the 1865 for context, and you'll see how we sorted that out in a minute. Of course, I'm Edward Branley, the NOLA History Guy, and that's how you can get a hold of me, along with at NOLA History Guy on all of social media. Here's the painting itself, and it's a very Boyd Cruise painting is the best way to describe this, right? He starts with a scene. Uh, a lot of times usually from a photo and then adds components to it based on his study, based on other photos and that kind of thing. So this is the levee at New Orleans. This is the riverfront in the mid 19th century. We know the date here is going to be 1865 to 1866. So we went ahead and said 1865. And that's because of the riverboat, the steamboat that you see on the left, the Fashion. And we know the Fashion was built in 1865. So this is a very busy riverfront scene, lots of activity. It is very typical of what you would have seen if you could transport back in time to 1865. Now remember, we think the average individual in particular, well, actually the average anybody who knows a little bit about American history, you say 1865 and you think the Civil War, but it's important to remember that the Civil War is long over for all intents and purposes in the city of New Orleans. It's been over since May 1st, 1862, when Farragut comes up the river with his squadron of naval ships and vessels, and Butler marches up the Mississippi on the ground with 30,000 troops. So the war, the Civil War was over at that point for the city. The port reopens under Union control again, and at least uh, ocean-going commerce coming from uh, up the Gulf, from the Gulf of Mexico up the river has returned by 1862. Now, riverborne commerce, of course, takes a little bit longer because the war is still going on. But by 1865, enough of the well, first, of course, we have the surrender. So, most of 1865 is, quote, peacetime at that point. But even when the war was still taking place, so much of the Mississippi River in Louisiana was now under Union control that commerce was moving along just fine. They carry that into 1866, which is possible for the painting. You get the idea there. Then, of course, we see this busy scene. And what do we see? Well, we see a whole bunch of steamboats that are docked on the waterfront at New Orleans. So you can see if you go by the stacks, you've got one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, 8 riverboats that I count. If you count more, let me know. I see, yeah, 8 riverboats with the classic twin smokestacks that we see there. Most of them side wheel ships like the Fashion. So and just a busy scene on the dock where goods and passengers are being loaded. Goods are being loaded and unloaded from these steamboats, and passengers are embarking and disembarking. So it's a busy time, and that's it's an important piece of New Orleans history, and why New Orleans was so important to the country uh, going all throughout the 19th century. Here's our tour guide talking points. Hello to all my friends that our tour guides in New Orleans, particularly with the Friends of the Cabildo walking French Quarter walking tours. New Orleans, of course, at this time is the second largest port in the United States. We say antebellum, but it was certainly the second largest port still once the blockade had been lifted. So, from 1862 on, it resumed its status as that second largest port. This particular Boyd Cruise painting just reflects the busyness of that second largest port, reflects how the waterfront was just hustle bustle and so much activity. King Cotton was a hot dog brand back in the day in New Orleans, but no, literally cotton was king, and it was the primary item moving in and out of the port of New Orleans. Raw cotton was picked on plantations and later sharecropper farms that the plantations were converted to. Uh, Cotton was raised and picked on the farms. Seeds, cotton gins, pulled the seeds from the cotton bolls, and then that raw cotton was baled up and then loaded onto the steamboats, onto the river boats, and brought down to New Orleans, where it was then further prepared for export, for transfer to ocean-going ships and sent out different places. Sugar was secondary to cotton. Cotton was of course, the big crop, but sugar was still quite important to the port, and was shipped out. What we had, of course, you have sugarcane plantations all throughout Louisiana. The sugarcane was grown, harvested. The cane stalks were boiled out, and sugar was granulated on the plantation and then shipped in barrels and sacks down to New Orleans, where it was then converted into molasses for ocean going export, because molasses was easily barreled. It was thick and wouldn't leak from sacks and that kind of thing. So it was usually sugar was exported as molasses to other locations. In the painting, the riverboat fashion is featured. That we'll come back. Yeah, we'll show that again. It's on the show page, as you know. The fashion regularly ran from Vicksburg to New Orleans, and you saw that listing of its primary destinations on the side wheel. The fashion burned in December of 1866 in what becomes one of the worst steamboat disasters on the Mississippi River. Uh, I don't know if that motivated, I don't think that the disaster motivated crews to paint it, but the visualization of the busy scene. And of course, this is a Boyd Cruise. The artist is Alvik Boyd Cruise, and he painted this later in his career in 1959. Let's talk for a minute about Boyd Cruise, because this is, of course, our second pod in the 4-pod series on Boyd Cruise's work. We started, of course, with the La Prette Mansion, the Sultan House, in the previous pod. Boyd Cruise was born in 1909 in Cairns, Mississippi. His family moved from Mississippi to Lake Charles in 1918. Cruise came to New Orleans when he was accepted into the New Orleans School of Art in 1928. After graduating from the School of Art, he went to work as an artist in New Orleans. By that point, we're into the 30s. The Depression has hit. The term "starving artist" wasn't just an exaggeration. These guys were really hard pressed for work until Roosevelt, till FDR begins basically throwing a lot of money at a lot of projects across the nation to employ Americans and get us through the Depression. Now, we know that in particular, we talk about WPA Works Progress Administration projects. You think about the bathhouse at Pontchartrain Beach, or other projects like building Charity Hospital in 1932. But a lot of projects were also focused on non-construction, non-manual labor jobs. And so we had a lot of WPA projects that were geared towards writers and photographers and musicians and artists and teachers. And Boyd Cruise was commissioned a number of different to do a number of different paintings related to some of these products and projects. And in particular, Cruise did a number of paintings for the Historic American Buildings Survey projects. That's that HABS or HABS. And in the late 1930s, the National Park Service administered the HABS projects. These were architectural and photographic surveys of significant buildings in various cities, various towns across the country. In 37 to 40, Habs focused a lot on, in particular, the French Quarter and the Garden District in New Orleans. Uh, Photographers would shoot architectural photography of buildings. Then architectural illustrators would draw elevations and plans as if you were building them. Basically, a historic American building survey, you could pretty much rebuild the building from the survey at that point. And because we the WPA and the Park Service wanted to also employ artists, painters like Boyd Cruise were commissioned to then go beyond just a black and white photo or a line drawing elevation and actually paint the buildings or paint the various scenes. And that became really Cruise's stock in trade. So by later in his career, you see him painting these scenes like this particular riverfront scene. The WPA projects, the HAB surveys continued on, but the funding for a lot of these artist and writer projects uh, ended with the start of World War II, because then the money was pumped into the war effort and people got jobs. Locally, you were building Higgins boats or PBY Catalinas or other jobs for the war effort. So that kind of changed the focus, and Cruise switched from doing that commercial, government sponsored work to teaching. He taught at several local art schools. He also taught at Newcomb College, which was the ladies' women's college at Tulane University in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. His final painting, Cruise retired, as it were, in 1962. His last painting was at the Beauregard Kai's house, the BK house, and we've written about this, and we'll put that on the show page as well. And then Boyd Cruise passed away on December 4th, 1988. All right, let's get back to the painting. So let's talk about the Levee. Okay, so commerce on the riverfront. Here's kind of how things worked. Raw materials were grown, raised, and harvested up the river. So steamboats would go up to the various plantations. That's why if you ever see one of those maps where it shows the breakdown of the locations of plantations, they all are basically have riverfront property where you could bring, you grew cotton, grew sugar cane on your farmland, and then brought it to the river where you granulated the sugar. You took the used cotton gins to take the seeds out of the cotton, bale all of that up, barrel all of that, load it onto the river boats, and the steamboats then brought that down. Again, cotton, raw cotton, big bales of cotton, Sacks of granulated sugar, barrels of granulated sugar were loaded up on the steamboats. Now, when that cotton got to New Orleans, and there's pictures, we'll have to write something about that. But if you look at Darby's book, you'll see this as well. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But the bales of cotton that came down on the steamboats were the raw cotton. It's like you say bale of cotton, you think of something that's 3.5, 4 feet tall, and it's the raw, unpressed cotton. Well, that wasn't a very efficient way of transporting cotton, but it was there, there was no industry, no industrial equipment on these plantation farms. So the steamboats loaded up those bales of raw cotton and brought it down to New Orleans. When they got here, those bales were then offloaded from the steamboats and transported by mule to pressing plants here in the city. And the idea behind a cotton press was think in terms of a modern day like a trash compactor, where it's like if you take trash bags from your kitchen and you throw them in the compactor, then you hit that button, and then Star Wars style, the trash compactor just smashes everything into a block or a brick, and then that was more efficient for disposal. Well, now take bales of raw cotton and just dump the raw cotton into the press. And what are you doing? You're pushing all the air out of that. And then so you press the cotton so it becomes very, very dense. And then you wrap that up into a smaller bale, which would then make it easier, make it more efficient to export that. So those cotton with the raw cotton comes to the city. It's pressed in the plants. There's still the remains, not remains, but repurposed buildings. A couple of the cotton pressing plants. Go over by the Walmart on Chapatula Street, and several of the buildings that you see there along Chop are old cotton presses, or old cotton press complexes, and some of the buildings are still there from the 19th century. So the cotton bales where cotton was pressed, it's baled back up and then put usually on ocean-going ships for export. Sugar, same basic idea. You've got everybody's seen a sugar cane stalk. You harvest the sugar cane, then it's granulated. You extract the sugar from the cane plant. It's granulated. That's Deborah's process and all of that on the plantation. Then you take granulated sugar, put it into sacks, put it into barrels, load that onto the steamboats. It took a little more industrial, heat and industrial equipment to, again, then process that and kind of make it denser to make it more efficient for shipment. And the idea there was that the sugarcane processors would then take granulated sugar and convert it into molasses. And if you bought molasses at the store, it's big, thick, syrupy, goopy stuff. That was, that's a lot denser than granulated sugar, where there's a lot of air in between the crystals and all of that kind of thing. So convert it, process it into molasses, fill that up in barrels, and off it goes onto ships for export. So back to the steamboats, to kind of sum this up in terms of commerce on the river. The steamboats are going up and down the river. If you saw, on the Fashion, Vicksburg to Natchez to New Orleans, that kind of thing. Other river boats going further up the river. It was you loaded up a lot of stuff, but you could still take passengers on those boats, and that's where you get the magnificent galleries and the riverboat gambling and duels and fights and all the crazy stories that we know from various, anything from Sam Clemens all the way to Derby's book. But passengers, of course, rode in both directions on the steamboats on the river. Back to the cotton. Let's talk about this. Okay, so cotton is grown on the plantation. It's harvested, it's picked, it's then pre-processing, best way to say, cotton gins, mechanical devices that would then you'd crank the cotton gin or use a steam gin to separate the seeds from the cotton fibers. And so what you end up with is kind of, yeah, a cotton ball that you buy at Target or something, for makeup, or treating a cut or something. Those are still a little condensed, but you can see the cotton fibers there. It's very light, it's very airy, but you bale that up and get that to New Orleans, and so of course those bales come to New Orleans, and as we say, they're brought to the pressing plants. The result of the product from the pressing plant is what you see here in this zoom in on the cruise painting. So you've got that guy, he's in those white trousers with the dark blue jacket and the straw hat, and he's leaning against, what is that, 2, 4, 6, 7 bales of pressed cotton. So what's happened is the raw cotton has come off the steamboat. It's been brought over to the pressing plant, and now it's being returned to the riverfront, where it'll be loaded back onto, most likely, an ocean-going ship. And yeah, we say ocean-going, we're talking not the river boats that are just going up to Illinois or Missouri and then back down again, but talking, classic ocean-going ships with sails and masts, and of course they're steam-powered at this time. So they would load up those pressed bales as dense as possible for export, and then they would go down the river to the Gulf, around out of the Gulf, and then either up the Atlantic coast to textile plants in Georgia and the Carolinas, etc., up into Maryland even, for conversion of processing into to fabric, and then into clothing and cotton goods, or just all the way across to Liverpool, to Liverpool, to London, and then to ports in France, continental Europe, that kind of thing. So these are the bales that are destined for export, which is kind of an interesting contrast, because these dense bales are not likely to be shipped to they're not likely to be loaded back onto a riverboat like the Fashion. So this is all loaded up. So but the Fashion is possibly taking on other goods, taking on stuff to go back upriver, as well as passengers, and then an ocean going ship will dock here and load up all of those bales of cotton, is most likely what's going to happen. In addition to the bales of cotton we see going towards the right-hand side of the painting, we see a flurry of activity. There's lots of barrels that look like they're ready to be loaded onto ships as well. That's most likely molasses that's awaiting loading, just like those bales of cotton are awaiting loading. And then there's one more type of cargo featured here, and that's going to be the human cargo, right? So you can see there's a coach, looks like a classic stagecoach there, that has pulled up to the riverfront, and it's disembarked several ladies there that you can see, that they are looking for the specific riverboat that's going to take them up the river. Now, maybe they are planters' wives and daughters that live up on the various plantation farms up the river from New Orleans, and so they're using this transportation to go back and forth. Maybe they're from cities again up, in Illinois, Missouri, coming, come down to spend some time in New Orleans, and now they're heading back north. Either way, you kind of get the idea here. So you can see you've got some uniformed sailors from the steamboats that are going to then be directing and assisting these ladies and other passengers, gentlemen, that are going to take passage on the steamboats. The steamboats referred, this is just a regular thing for the steamboat. Pick up cotton and raw goods up the river, pick up passengers, pick up mail as well, and then bring it down to New Orleans. And then from once in New Orleans, do it all over again. Pick up finished goods, imported stuff, things that were purchased that need to go back up to the plantations or to cities up the river, and then passengers coming back up. And these were referred to as packet routes. And you can see there's a sign there in the middle of this zoom in, which is on the right hand. This is a section of the right hand side of the painting. And you can see that sign that says Cairo and St. Louis regular packet. Well, now we know that the fashion that's out of frame here to the left on the painting is hitting Vicksburg and Natchez. It's not going all the way up to Illinois and St. Louis, but so that sign is directing passengers. You know, the coach pulls up and people disembark, and perhaps it's that steamboat that the sign that's directly behind the sign, and that's where the crew of those riverboats will stand by the big sign, say, yes ma'am, this is your boat, come on, let's get you on board, let's get you settled into your stateroom, and off they go. And so when you hear the term packet in particular, if you look at uh, maritime advertising going up into all the way into the 1920s and 1930s, you'll see packet routes, Havana packets going to Cuba, packet ships going from New Orleans to Liverpool, New Orleans to Le Havre in France, that kind of thing. All right, let's talk about the fashion. So here's the zoom in so you can see. We had the steamboat fashion on the left-hand side of the painting, and you'll see it's a side paddle wheel steamboat. So and so you can see that's the protective cover so that the paddle wheel doesn't get damaged. Compare that to the Natchez. If you go down to the riverfront now, and tour guides will be happy to show you, take you on the tour up to the moonwalk, up to the river, and you'll see that the Natchez, the steamboat Natchez, is a rear paddle wheel steamer, where the fashion and most of the ships that you see in this cruise painting are side paddle wheels. Side paddle wheels tended to be more efficient and also less susceptible to damage because you could cover the paddle wheel better. You see that in particular with warships as naval warships evolve in the steam era, that most of them were side paddle wheels because you could armor that covering. Of course, the fashion wouldn't, fashion has that wood protection, but it wouldn't be armored, but you get the idea. So it's a side paddle wheel. Here's a zoom in of the whole of all of, well, the whole of the fashion, at least that cruise painted. It's, again, we said it's a side wheel packet steamer. The fashion was built in Cincinnati in 1865. Its regular route after it was launched, it traveled, basically ran the packet from Vicksburg to Natchez to New Orleans. It was built, built for that purpose too, because by 1865, the river south of Vicksburg was open, so those plantations could go back to growing cotton and getting cotton in large quantities back down to New Orleans. And the fashion was, very typical of the steamboats that would do that run. Just pick up cotton from the plantations, stop in Vicksburg and Natchez to embark and disembark passengers, pick up other goods, pick up mail, and then come to Baton Rouge and come to New Orleans. That is when tragedy struck, was a year later after its construction in 1866, and the fashion became the subject of one of the worst steamboat disasters in the history of travel on the Mississippi River. Uh, this is a description of the event from Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper, uh, downbound with 250 passengers, 250 people on that riverboat, 250 passengers and 2,700 bales of cotton. She caught fire 7 miles above Baton Rouge and burned December 27th, 1866. Uh, yeah, catching fire. Uh, Geez, that was the biggest threat and the main reason why so many of these steamboats were short-lived. Let's face it, the steamboat itself is a bit of an inferno, right? You're burning coal to create steam to move the paddle wheel, which means you've got a huge furnace to burn the coal. That creates boiling water. The water becomes steam. The steam is piped to the paddle wheel that moves the boat. Right there, what do you have? You're burning stuff. You're shoveling coal into a furnace that generates sparks. The problem is you've got 2,700 bales of cotton that is very easy to catch fire. Take some raw cotton and just take a match. It's like, did you ever do the flint and steel thing with cotton tinder, angel hair tinder? You strike, you take a piece of flint, you strike the rock with a little steel bar, classic Cub Scout stuff to start a fire. And what do? You put cotton fiber, you put angel hair cotton right next to that, and you strike the flint. It generates sparks. The sparks go on to the cotton. The cotton catches on fire. You can visualize this, but here in the case of a riverboat, of a steamboat, we're talking bales and bales and bales of flammable material. This stuff catches on fire so fast. Cotton fires starting from cotton on the riverboats and then on the waterfront itself were just the bane of existence for the crews, for the owners, and for everybody involved on the port. It's like it was kind of easy to run away from it when you were on the ground, of course, but trying to salvage your ship, disgorge this burning cargo. Just so many lives lost over time with this, and you can see 250 passengers get caught up in this inferno. This has got to be the most tragic piece of the various illustrations from Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper are women trying to get off of the fashion with their children. So they go to the bow of the ship and you've disgorged the cargo. You've kicked off any bales that are already there to to try to get off. Now, at that point, adult women, adults in general, would just jump into the water and head toward the side, and eventually the fashion runs aground so that jumping off is okay. But you have whole families that were taking passage from Vicksburg down to New Orleans on the fashion. So you got this tragic scene of women. Some women are jumping into the water by themselves, and then they're catching the children as the mothers throw kids off of the boat into the arms of the passengers who were already in the water. This is just unbelievably tragic. And you get the idea. This is why Frank Leslie's newspaper was so popular. I mean, you talk about sensational illustrations. I mean, now you'd have a TikTok of it, but this is late '66, and you get these sketch artists that if they were close to a sensational or a tragic news event of some kind, they knew that they could interview those who were involved in the incident and then sketch it based on those accounts if they didn't witness it themselves, and then sell these sensationalized sketches to the various illustrated newspapers. The newspaper would then turn the sketch into a woodcut, press that, to send that to press, and that becomes the illustrated newsletter. Of course, as we're mentioning here, you can see it. We'll put in a show note link as well here. That the illustrations here in the pod today are from the name of the newspaper is called Frank Leslie's Illustrated Newspaper. It was printed from the 1840s actually down into the 1890s. The headquarters, the publishing, the newspaper was published in New York City. Frank Leslie's is just an incredible resource for antebellum history and antebellum illustration because it's just about everything, anything from tragic riverboat disasters like this all the way to Civil War battles to sketches of important people in the news, that kind of thing. So yeah, you didn't have commercial photography in the newspaper yet, but you had these sketch artists, and then the newspaper takes the sketches, buys them from the sketch artist, creates woodcuts of them, and then prints the sketch basically as part of the newspaper. So you can see that the reporting of the December 1866 disaster hits Frank Leslie's newspaper, basically it's published in New York City in mid-January, January 19th of 1867. If you want to know more about steamboats, buy my friend Derby's book, please. Derby Gisclair wrote a book last year called New Orleans Steamboat Stories, and we'll put a link to how you can get the book. Just a wonderful book with illustrations, sketches, and photographs of steamboats going back to the early days of riverboat steamboat commerce, all the way to the into the 1920s and 1930s, when you start seeing the steamboat, the classic steamboats uh, uh, being transitioned into diesel boats and that kind of thing. So again, it's New Orleans Steamboat Stories, and the subtitle is The Brief Lives of Mississippi Riverboats. And boy, Derby's not kidding with the brief life thing. Look at the fashion. Built in 1865, burned to the ground by the end of 1866. What do? They go build another one because the cotton's king, and it's that much of a big deal. Anyway, yeah, go get Derby's book, and you too can go sit at the coffee shop or sit at Wake and Bacon, which is where I was when I took that picture, and read some really fascinating New Orleans history. Greetings from NOLA. I just love this illustration. I did a talk for the Friends of the Cabildo on postcards, and of course we pulled up some of the old Kirk Tyke Company postcards, and they were one of the companies that did the greetings from New York, greetings from Seattle, greetings from Nashville, and of course there was Tyke did a greetings from New Orleans postcard back in the 1930s as well. And there's a group of folks. Their site is greetingstour.com. Basically, they got themselves into an RV and traveled around the country painting murals that are essentially updated Kirk Tyke postcards. And when they came to New Orleans, they got permission from building owner at Magazine and Joseph Street and St. Joseph Streets, and painted this mural. I just love it. Right, you got carnival mask and the cathedral, and then looking from the front from across the river over into the quarter in the CBD, little more of the skyline there in the O and the L, and then the A has some a tray of bull crawfish with all the trimmings and the dome and the saints. I just love this, right? Anyways, greetingstour.com. Go look at them and they'll gladly tell you their story. Yeah, a word from your sponsor. Hey, buy my books, right? The Brothers of Sacred Heart New Orleans is the story of St. Aloysius Coriezu and Brother Martin High Schools. My first book, New Orleans, the Canal Streetcar Line, I did in 2004. It's getting old, but it still tells the story of the Canal Streetcar Line from its inception in 1861 to its conversion to buses in 1964, and then the return of the red streetcars in 2004 when we wrote the book. MB, Maison Blanche Department Stores. I used to work for MB, and my friend Derby worked for MB as well, talking about, his book and everything. Maison Blanche Department Stores there at 901 Canal Street. The building is now the Ritz Hotel because the store closed in the 1990s. But Mr. Bingle was our beloved Christmas characters, Chapter 3, because he was the mascot and the Christmas mascot and the Christmas icon of the department store. And we tell the story of that in that book. New Orleans Jazz, you kind of get the idea there. It's a survey going back to King Bolden and the roots of jazz going into the 1890s to King Bolden, Creole musicians like Dut Ory and Pops, of course, and all the way into modern jazz and modern cats that are keeping the traditions going. And then the one cover that's not the sepia tone covers of the Images of America books there, that's Legendary Locals of New Orleans. It's about 185, 200 people, kind of like a who's who starting up there. You can see with, you got some older folks there all the way into, you got Marie Laveau and the Baroness Pentalba and Gus Beauregard. There's Pops in the middle. Dutch Morial on the left, Austin Leslie. I look at Wendell down in the bottom there too. It's it was a real fun book to do. And if you just want to get an idea of just the broad number of legends that we've had in 300 years in New Orleans, highly recommend it. It's a fun book. My most recent department store book was in 2017 from the History Press, on Krause Department Store, which was at 1201 Canal, which is a 1201 Canal condos now. The building's still there. Krause Department Store opened in 1903, closed in 1997. 20 years later, the History Press contacted and invited me to write a book about the history of the store. Learned a whole lot of fun stuff about, just continued my exploration of New Orleans retail on Canal Street, and Jewish retailing, because the Krause brothers, as well as their brother-in-law Leon Hyman, who took over the store and then passed it into his family, all Jewish retailing, great stories, wonderful tales of everything about the city there. Of course, I am the NOLA History Guy, at NOLA History Guy on Blue Sky, Instagram. The page is NOLA History Guy on Facebook. Hunt me down, no problem. The website where the show page is, depending on how you got a hold of the pod, you knew that already, nolahistoryguy.com. Feel free to shoot me an email, ping me on social media. If you ever have a question about New Orleans history, we'll see if we can help you out with that. And again, thanks to the folks who created this parchment. I just love this template. I try to use it as much as possible when doing talks and this kind of stuff for the pods and everything else. So that's our pod on this Boyd Cruise painting, and we'll continue the series as we go on.